Hello, I'm John Adams, editor of Digital Photo, and welcome to this Photoshop Made Easy video lesson. Well, we're looking at colour, and in particular we're looking at the features and functions of the Hue Saturation palette. And one wonderful thing you can do with the Hue Saturation palette is tone an image. And we've got a nice shot here of some ruins in York, but how would it look if we wanted to tone it, say, a different colour? Perhaps to a red. Quite interesting, changes the character of the image, or maybe we should try a sepia tone, something quite traditional. And again, it's got a different flavour and a different atmosphere. Or maybe another traditional toning treatment, a cyanotype, perhaps we should try that. And as we can see, we change the character once again. Well, in a package like Photoshop or Elements, these mono toning treatments are incredibly quick to achieve, and it's all done via the Hue Saturation palette. Let's see how it works. Well, let's just go back to our original image. There we are, there's our normal colour image, and then what we're going to do is open up the Layers palette. So if you go to Window and choose Layers, it'll pop up on screen. Now the Hue Saturation palette can be brought up in a number of ways. You can go to Enhance, Adjust Colour, Adjust Hue and Saturation. You can hit the shortcut Control and U just to bring it straight up on screen, or a smart way to use it is to use it as an adjustment layer, and that's why we need the Layers palette on screen. To create a new adjustment layer, just click on the half black, half white circle. The icon here in the Layers palette is at the foot of the palette in the full version of Photoshop and up the top of the palette in Elements. Click on that and from the list select Hue Saturation. This brings up the palette, and as you can see on screen we've got the Hue slider, the Saturation slider and the Lightness slider. What these three do, Hue changes the colours in the picture. By moving it to the left and the right we change it. It works in 360 degrees. We've got -180 to +180 when it's in its normal mode, and that sort of inverts the colours if we go to 180 degrees. Saturation, that's the intensity of the colour, or the volume control for colour. If we move it all the way to the left, we end up with black and white because we've got no colour at all, and if we go all the way to the right, things get fairly hideous and fairly oversaturated. So that's for very bold colour effects. Then at the bottom we've got Lightness. This one isn't used so much because lightness means you can either go to the left to get a black picture, so they're progressively darker the more to the left you go, or to the right you get a completely white picture at the extreme, or indeed a more pale washed out effect. This is sometimes used if you want a very sort of subtle image, something washed out to lay some text over. You'd perhaps use Lightness to generate those kind of effects. So they're the three main controls, but down here in the bottom right we've got a very interesting function called Colorize. Tick that and you instantly monotone an image. The default values are 0 in hue, which is red. Hue runs from 0 through to 360 and goes through every colour under the sun to get there, so red is 0 and 360 degrees. Saturation is set to 25. We can of course boost that to make a more intense colour if we wish. Lightness is set to 0, and that's pretty much where you're always going to leave it if you use the Colorize button. Now the red tone we use looked pretty good at a setting of 0 and 25 in saturation, so we'll just move that back there. And that's all we need to do. If we like that effect, we can just click OK, and there's our wonderful red-toned picture up on screen. But if we're not quite sure if we want to keep the red-toned image, because we've used an adjustment layer, we can adjust our decisions. Adjustment layers allow you to change your mind. So all we need to do is double-click on the adjustment layer thumbnail, double-click on that, and our Hue Sat palette pops up again on screen. And we can now change our mind. Instead of having our hue at 0, we can go for a cyanotype effect with a hue of 220. So we slide that up to 220. Saturation, we can probably go a bit higher than 25. Let's push that up to get a nice rich blue, something like 40 in saturation, and then we click OK. And there's our cyanotype. And of course, if we think, well, maybe we should try something ultra-traditional like a sepia tone, then we can do that too. Just double-click on that icon again, and all you need to do to generate a sepia tone is to put 30 in hue, about 30 in saturation, and click OK. And there's our sepia-toned image. As you can see, it's really quick and really easy to try different toning effects using the Colorize box in the Hue Saturation palette. And if you're not sure which one to use, which method, whether you want sepia, cyanotype, gold, red, yellow, green, whatever colour you choose, you can save different versions very, very quickly too. Let me just show you how it's done. If we've got, say, our sepia version here, to save that without flattening the image and crunching it down, we just go to File and choose Save As. And then as long as we pick JPEG, something like that here, we can save it as a copy, and it's actually called copy in the file name box here. So we can call it, let's just say sepia, hit save, and then we get our JPEG options. We'll go for a maximum quality JPEG, click OK, and it's saved. But after it's saved the file as a maximum quality JPEG, it will then revert to where we were to start with. So if we want to now try our blue toning, let's just open that up again. We went for a hue of 220, a saturation of 40. We can then click OK, and then we can go to File, Save As, and we'll perhaps call it blue. And if we save that as a JPEG, make sure you go for that. We then save it as a copy, hit save, there's our JPEG options, and it will save it and return again to the multi-layered document. So that's a really quick way of saving copies without having to flatten the image each time. So that's a handy tip for those of you that can't quite make their minds up about whether to go for a blue toning or a sepia toning or a gold toning or any other variant you wish to go for. One last thing about toning, sometimes you don't want the full pelt of a colour toning. For the chemical darkroom you can get what's called cool tone and warm tone papers, and these just have a hint of warmth or a hint of coolness to them. And the way to do that is, let's just open up our hue saturation palette again. We're just going to take Colorize out so we cancel it all. There we go. Now we're back to normal. There's our colour image. What we're going to do is now open the hue saturation palette, so we create a hue saturation adjustment layer, and then we're going to tick the Colorize box and move saturation all the way to 0. Now what we're looking at on screen is a pure black and white image, and it sometimes takes your eyes a little time to adjust to pure black and white. Screens have got different temperatures, it depends on the ambient light around, and sometimes your eyes will be seeing a screen as a bit blue or a bit yellow. So give your eyes time to adjust so you're actually seeing a pure black and white image. And when you are, then's the time to introduce the toning colour. Now for a warm tone effect, go for a hue of something like 20, that should do the trick, and then gradually increase the saturation until you can see a difference, and I can see it already. We've got a figure of about 14 there. So I think 15 or so is plenty for a warm tone effect. If you start going beyond 20 and you're getting rich toning colours coming through, that's far too much. So somewhere between 10 and 20 should be ideal. I think something like that looks pretty good. About 15 in saturation, about 20 in hue, and there's a nice warm tone image. Now alternatively, if you want a cooler looking image without going all the way to a blue toning or a cyanotype effect, we'll just open up the hue saturation palette again, and we'll do the same thing. We'll back off saturation to 0, but this time we're going to have hue set at 220, which is a nice sort of cyan colour. So we'll go for 220 in hue, then we'll gradually increase the saturation just to see that coolness coming through. And I think that's probably enough there. Yeah, something like that is okay. Around 12 to 15, something around that sort of figure, will give you a nice cool tone effect. You're not looking for outlandish blues or outlandish orangey red tones for cool and warm toning. All you need is a hint of that colour, because that's all that's required to get the effect across. Okay, so try those toning techniques with your pictures, and remember to use the adjustment layer facility, because it is great if you can change your mind. Thanks for listening. See you next time.